What's going on, guys? Fluff here with another How I Mixed. This time we're going to check out Jared Dines Old MacDonald metal cover featuring Austin Dickey on vocals. Now, I immediately got a lot of requests to do How I Mixed with this song, specifically the vocal chain. So I'm going to briefly go through the instruments as I normally would, and then we're going to talk a lot about the vocal chain on how I kind of processed all of that. This was a rare occasion with a Jared Dines song in that I actually got to be a part of the tracking as opposed to being handed all of the vocal tracks and guitar tracks and things like that. So it was really cool to get to decide and make some kind of, make some decisions about how the vocals were going to be tracked. So first, here is the Easy Drummer Patch. This is my Fluff Big Snare 2016 kit. It sounds like this. Okay, next we have the solo. Now the solo is just the DI. I'm using JST, the Joey Sturgis Tones Ben Bruce plugin. I honestly didn't do anything to this plugin at all. Like, this is how it sounded. And it sounds great with Jared's guitars. I believe he used his Ibanez SZ with EMGs in it. I believe, at least for the rhythms. I'm not sure about the leads. Judging by the DIs, they're not EMGs, but for the guitar solo, I didn't use any EQ at all. It fit right, and you know what? I went with it. You should also note on the bus, so this is a track stack in Logic, by the way, but on the bus, I am bussing out. I have a send going to aux 8, which I didn't even label because I know that it's a delay. It's an H delay from Waves, and it's just a basic stereo delay, and it's giving it some width in the mix. So here's how it sounds on its own. Pretty cool. It sounds a little heavy-handed in the delay by itself, but in the mix, it really worked. And I was kind of mixing all of this as we went. Interesting experience, to say the least. So with the rhythm guitars, again, I have both DIs grouped and going into a bus, a track stack in Logic. And on the stereo bus, all I have going is an Eosis EQ with a little bit of carving to get it to fit, and I have some of the low end taken out. And as far as the actual guitar tones themselves, it's just Joey Sturgis Tones, the Ben Bruce plugin, which is just fantastic. I didn't do a lot here. All I really did is turn up the treble a little bit for some cut. And I believe I turned up the gain just a little bit, and that is it. It didn't require hardly anything at all. It took 5 minutes to do. So on their own, here's what they sound like. Now, you would expect it to be more low-end heavy, but really with this kind of aggressive music, you're going to let the bass do all of that. So getting to the bass, I was given the DI, and I copied the DI. It's identical. It's the same DI. And on one track, the dirty track, I have Tune Tracks Easy Mix 2 with the Ryan from Black Dahlia Murders, big nasty bass. And then on the other DI, I have a built-in Logic amp that models after the Mesa Boogie, I believe it's the 400 bass amp, and I have that bussed into the track stack, And on that stack, I am crushing it with compression. We're only at a 2-to-1 ratio, but the threshold is at like -26. So, I mean, it's being pretty aggressive and it's catching it really early on. And then I come in with some Waves CLA bass, and I'm really only using this for some growl and some additional compression. I then come in with some Logic stock EQ, and I carve out the middle section here because you don't really want a lot of mids in the bass tone itself because you want the guitar to handle all the mid-range. And then I'm coming in lastly with a multi-band compressor, a FabFilter Pro MB, just to kind of capture any additional flabby low end, because I know from having tracked Jared lots that he is an extremely aggressive player when he's playing bass. And it's almost comical how aggressive he picks the bass. And it sounds great in a mix, but you have to really control that low end. And all he was using for this track was a $200 Music Man sub bass with that big humbucker. It's, you know, a plywood guitar, and it sounds incredible. And the isolated bass tone sounds like this. So what's interesting about the vocal chain is, I didn't know how we were going to track vocals or what Jared even had in mind when him and Austin showed up to my house. They just asked me, hey, you want to record a video? And I thought, yeah, sure. And so I just said, yeah, sure, come on over, guys. And then Jared handed me the thumb drive, and here it was. So because we were moving so fast with the parts, I have 8 tracks, and they're all going to the bus, the same bus. This is kind of unusual. I don't know if I would normally, I definitely would not do it this way normally, because if I'm going to process vocals differently, I usually like to group them together. I don't like to normally do different styles of vocals, as you'll see in a second, into the same bus, but I didn't really have time to be playing super nerd dog eye, and that was okay, and it worked out in this instance. So I have the main hook, the old MacDonald Has a Farm hook, and we stabbed those first. We found each chorus, and Austin tracked these, and that sounds like this. MacDonald had a farm, W-I-A-I-O, and on that farm he had a cow, W-I-A-I-O. Okay, so the vocal chain when tracking Austin was a Shure SM7B into my JDK R20 preamp into a JDK R24 EQ, which really was set fairly flat, so it wasn't really doing much, into a Warm Audio WA76, which is basically a Universal Audio 1176 compressor. Now, I had it set quite aggressively. I had it set on the 12-to-1 ratio, because obviously with screaming vocals, you want them to be as level as possible, but I didn't want to super crush the vocal going in, so I wasn't super aggressive on the goosing the input going into the compressor, but I still used a slower attack and a really fast release to keep up with Austin, because I didn't know what he would be doing. All I was told is he was going to be making animal sounds, so I didn't know what he was going to do. So in tracking that, you can see the transients and the waves of the vocals aren't super leveled out and super crushed, although they're crushed, but they're not hyper crushed. So on each track, to level out the individual volumes, because obviously doing a horse neigh or a chicken or rooster sound is going to be a different volume. So I'm using on each track an 1176. This is the built-in compressor for Logic. An 1176 compressor with a 3.7 to 1 ratio to further level it out. And then everything is going into the bus. And I'm using Slate Virtual Mix Rack. I'm coming in with a Neve EQ just to kind of EQ everything. Austin's voice has a lot of low end, so you can see on my high pass filter, You know, I have his vocal cut off at about 83 hertz. Anything below that's pretty cut off. And I also have the low one turned down at about 80 as well, just for a shelf to kind of lower it. I also have the mid-range bumped around 1.8 K. And then I have the high end bumped at 5.4. I just thought it sounded good. And I have a small shelf EQ, you know, just over a dB. And then finally, I'm compressing even further. I'm using the 12:1 ratio, and I am further crushing the vocal. I am leveling it all out, but what you will notice is there's not a lot of noise. The noise floor is still relatively low, and this is a good example of gain staging, because while you do want to compress going in with something like this and the SM7, you don't want to try to achieve, you don't want to solve world hunger in one pass going right in. That creates a lot of noise if you were to crank up the input and crank up the output and all that kind of stuff. So I think this is a good example of gain staging. And here's what the rest of it sounds like. You'll notice I have the main hook. I put Vox hook, and I put Vox 2 and Vox 3. These were all just single tracked vocals. And then they wanted to do a Frankie Amur style double track, which is down here. And then I had a wide hang. I called it wide hang because I have it bust to a very wide reverb and a very wide panning. So here's what it sounds like isolated. With a moother and a moother, we're a moother, move everywhere, move, well, MacDonald at a farm, yo. So when it came time to do the Frankie Amur style vocal, we had to double the vocal each pass. So that sounds like this. And I had these panned a little bit, you know, minus 33% and 33%. So it'll jump from these two to these two. Here and a clack, clack there. Here a clack, there a clack, everywhere a clack, 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 clack. Here and a clack, clack there. Here a clack, there a clack, probably the last clack. Well, MacDonald at a farm, yo. Now, that's a pretty good double track. We were just flying by the seat of our pants, and we were really just running and gunning. This all happened very quickly. So Jared also asked that the next section have a single vocal that was not double tracked but wide. And he wanted it real reverby, Stairway to Heaven, Robert Plant in a well kind of an effect. So we achieved that by bussing, like I said. We have the Vox going to the H delay. And we also have it going to a chambered reverb, and that kind of achieved the effect that Jared wanted. And that sounds like this. And there's a few other takes right here. I believe there's a rooster one. Get a rooster! Sounds great on its own, doesn't it? But in the mix, it sounds like this. Now, I will point out the entire time we were tracking, I had a little bit of compression going on the master bus. I always like to compress just slightly. Now, the sound doesn't even really change when I turn it off and on. It's just kissing it. But it's enough once you start stacking tracks. And then I had the multi-band compressor going on the bus as well the entire time we were tracking, just because this is something I normally do in the mastering process, and I kind of wanted to get ahead of it and just know what that sounded like ahead of time, because time was of the essence, because I think we made the video, you know, just in like 2 hours or something like that. So And that's it. That is Old MacDonald Had a Farm from Jared Dines. And if you want to see the original video, link down below in the description. It was filmed here. And if you have any other requests for how I mix, please leave them down below in the comments. You have been wonderful. I have been Fluff. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.